Hello friends, welcome to this session. In this we will be talking about what is population, the population distribution and the growth of population. It is an essential part of human geography. So before we start with any concept of population, we must be very sure about what is population and what is the difference between the terms population geography and demographic. So let's understand first the meaning of demography. We say study of population geography is known as demography, but basically what is demography is a study where we involve statistical analysis of population. So I have a sample of population and I'm trying to do some statistical analysis based on that. So that would be known as demography. While population geography is a common branch in geography. Under population geography, what we try to understand is the spatial variation in population distribution. So basically what we talk about here is distribution of population and how different regions have different kind of population and what are the major regions of population. Now, before we start to understand the distribution and growth of population, there are few fundamental things which are very important to understand as to why we need to study about population geography or the concept of population. Most of the population is concentrated in the less developed countries or the developing countries. We have more than 6 billion people on Earth. This is the ever-time high since the start of civilization. And lastly, the increase in the population has been the most in the second half of the century. Second half of the 20th century has the highest increase in the population. These are the three basic reasons as to why the importance of population geography and population studies in today's day world has increased. Now, when we talk about population, there are few fundamental concepts that we need to understand. There are few reasons why we study population geography. So when we try to study population geography, we try to answer where population is distributed. That's the first and the foremost issue that we would be understanding. So when we talk about where population is distributed, we talk about distribution in terms of concentration and density. So these are the two fundamental concepts that we try to study while understanding the concept of population distribution. The next concept that we would be understanding is where has population increased? Where population has increased. Why population is increasing differently at different rate in different countries. So why population increase is different in different countries. So that's the next thing we would be understanding. And lastly, what we would be talking about is why our world faces the problem of overpopulation. So these are the four fundamental things that we would be discussing in the concept of population. So in today's session, we would be covering the first two topics, and in the next session, we would be covering the next two topics. So let's start with the first two topics, where population is distributed and where has population increased. So we'll start with the distribution of population. Now, as I said, distribution of population can be understood by two phenomena, the concentration of population and the density of population. Now, when we talk about concentration of population, I can say there are few areas which are highly concentrated and other areas which are sparsely concentrated. Now, what's the difference? Highly concentrated means there are a huge number of people living in that region, and sparsely concentrated is very few people are living in those areas. So highly concentrated areas are also known as ecumene areas, and sparsely concentrated are known as non-ecumene areas. Let's understand the highly concentrated areas. So accordingly, we divide the world into four areas which are highly concentrated. First is East Asia, then you have South Asia, Then you have Southeast Asia, and finally Western Europe. Now we'll be discussing the essential elements in all these four regions. So let's start with East Asia. East Asia has around one-fifth of the population. Of this one-fifth, 5/6 of the population is concentrated in China. So China is the main element in East Asia. When we talk about South Asia, we say it's the second largest population center with one-fifth of the population again, and the major area is concentrated in India. When we talk about Southeast Asia, it's basically made up of islands. So Indonesia alone has around 13677 islands, and these islands account for this Indonesia accounts as the fourth largest or the fourth most populous country of the world. Then you have Philippines in Southeast Asia, which is another major hub for highly concentration. Finally, you have Western Europe. Western Europe is the third largest population cluster, and it accounts for 1/9 of the world population. Besides this, there are few other areas which fall under ecumene areas are the Northeast United States of America and Southeast Canada. These two account for 2% of the world population. So these are the major ecumene areas. Now when we talk about ecumene areas, let's understand which regions are ecumene and why they are ecumene. So when we talk about ecumene areas, the major factors that affect the density or the concentration in any region is fertility of the soil. So it's basically the farmers. So first reason is fertile soil, which has lot of farmers. Then you have moderate to temperate climatic conditions. That's another reason why there are a lot of people in any region. Then proximity to river or water body. So you have river, ocean or water body nearby. These all factors account for high concentration of areas. Now we move on to the next topic, that is sparsely concentration. The sparsely concentrated areas are known as non-ecumene areas. Some of the common examples of the non-ecumene areas, we'll be coming back on ecumene once again. So we'll just understand the fundamentals first. So in the sparsely concentrated areas, the major reason why any area is having less population is either it's too dry, like deserts, it's too cold or permafrost like Antarctica or Arctic Circle. It is highly wet, like very high precipitation in the huge regions of Southeast Asia. Either it is highland, it's inaccessible region. The soil is not fertile, so you have infertile soils as another region, and remoteness. It's not easily accessible by other regions. So these are some of the reasons why any area is sparsely concentrated. Now let's understand the concept here. So we'll be seeing the ecumene regions once again. So as we can see here, there are regions of primary concentration, secondary and tertiary concentration. So primary concentration region has more than 70% of the population, like Southeast Asia, East Asia, Northwest Europe, as we already discussed. Then you have the secondary concentration areas, which is California, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, Guyana in Africa, and Java in Asia. Then you have tertiary concentration, like countries in Southeast Asia. You have Nile and Mediterranean region and the high basins of Mexico. Now, the interesting thing to note here is most of the population is concentrated in the North Hemisphere. Again, in the North Hemisphere, most of the population is concentrated towards the continental margins. So continental margins of North Hemisphere have highest concentration of population. Then some other interesting facts include we have 75% of the people that occupy only 5% of Earth's surface. And we have 50% of the people who are located only in urban areas. Now when we talk about all these factors, we come across some interesting terms, that is carrying capacity. So any of this region is able to carry so many people. Why is it so? So carrying capacity is the ability of any area to support the number of people. So for example, this is an agricultural area. It's fertile, it's highly fertile, so it can support, like for example, 10,000 people here. Okay. On the other hand, there is a desert area where there is no water source, nothing. It can help survive only, I can say, 100 people. So that means the carrying capacity for the fertile agricultural region here is 10,000, while for this desert region is only 100. So that is an important concept in population studies where most of the students get trapped into. Now this was the first classification that we did based on concentration. Now the next important factor here is density. So when we start with density, we can say number of people occupying any given area is the density. For example, this is a region of 10 square kilometer. So there are two areas of 10 square kilometer. In one area, there is 10,000 people. Okay. In another area, there are 100 people. So the density here would be 10,000 by 10, and here it would be 100 by 10. So here per square kilometer there would be only 10 people, while here per square kilometer there would be 1,000 people. So there is the difference between the dense areas and the less dense areas. So when we talk about density, we classify density based on three parameters. First is the arithmetic density. Arithmetic density is technically total number of people lying on the total land. So you have, as we discussed in the example here, so you have total number of people and the total land. The next we will be talking about is the physiological density. Physiological density is the total number of people divided by the total arable land or the total fertile area. And finally, we have the agricultural density, that is mainly to deal with the farmers. So you have total number of farmers divided by total arable area. Okay, so this is the basic essence of understanding the distribution of population. Now, when we start with growth in population, there are few things we must understand. The first important concept here is understanding the growth curve. So when we are talking about in terms of the growth curve here, as we can see, you have the population in years, and then you have the number of population in billion. So as we can see, this dotted line shows the growth of developed countries, while the solid line shows the growth in developing countries. So the population growth in developing countries is much more than developed countries. That is the first fundamental concept that we have understood here. The next concept here is across the years, if we see the world population, we can see the world population was 1 million in 1804. It reached 2 million in 1927. That means 123 years. So this 123 years is known as the doubling time. So doubling time is any time in which the population would double, or for example the existing population is, I can say, 6 billion, and if it increases to say 7 billion in 20 years, that means what is the doubling time here? The doubling time is 20 years. Now this is a very interesting example. Based on the growth rate of the population in any region, you have the doubling time. For example, China has a technical doubling time of 61 years. That means it is forecasted that the population of China would double in 61 years. Then you have India. It's forecasted the population would double in 35 years. So India might surpass the China's population and become number one in terms of population. The next concept here is, the next country here is United States of America. I say the doubling time is 99 years. That means in 99 years the population of United States would double out. Then the next is Japan, which is a very interesting case. The doubling time is interestingly 267 years. That means after 267 years the population of Japan would double out. So this is one important term that we need to understand. while understanding the growth in population. So the first concept we took here was doubling time. Now we would talk about where the second question that we started with, where the population has increased. When we talk about where the population has increased, we need to answer few basic questions. That's fertility, mortality, and natural increase. Now, what's the difference between the terms? Fertility is basically the birth rate. Mortality is the death rate. Natural increase is birth rate minus death rate. That is the natural increase. So natural increase excludes migration. That's very important question. So there is no concept of migration that is included in natural increase. The fourth concept here is mechanical increase. Mechanical increase, on the other hand, includes the concept of migration. So you have birth rate minus death rate plus immigration minus immigration. So immigration is the incoming people, immigration is the outgoing population. That whole divided by the total population. So that's the mechanical increase. So we have talked about natural increase, we have talked about mechanical increase. But we are still to understand the concept of fertility and mortality, which is a very, very important concept. Before we start with these two concepts, let's understand a few basic terms. The first is crude birth rate. We call it CBR, or the crude birth rate. This crude birth rate is basically number of live births per 1,000 people. Okay. The next is crude death rate, and that's technically number of live deaths per 1,000 people. So you have number of live deaths per 1,000 people. So that's basically the crude birth rate and the crude death rate. Now, before we understand any concept, there are numerous examples to understand the birth rate and the death rate. So we'll be moving on to the next slide, which shows the various equations for the concept. So here is the crude birth rate, as we have already discussed. It's basically number of live births divided by the population into 1,000. The next is fertility ratio or child-woman ratio. It's number of the children in the age group of 0 to 4 divided by the number of females in the productive age group. Then we talk about general fertility ratio. It's number of live births divided by the total population of women in the reproductive age. So these three deal with the concept of fertility. Now we come on to the next concept, that is mortality. So under mortality, we talk about crude death rate, that's number of deaths divided by the median population into 1,000. Then you have age-specific death rate, that's number of deaths in a specific age and sex divided by the total population of that age and sex. Then we talk about infant mortality, that's very important. Under infant mortality, we consider children only under the age of 1 year. So it's basically annual number of deaths of infant under 1 year of age. Then we talk about another concept, that is total live births. Then you have the child mortality rate, where we talk about under 5, so it's less than 5, it's less than 1. When we talk about infant, it's less than 1. When we talk about child, it's less than 5. And we talk about prenatal mortality, that means the neonatal deaths and the fetal deaths, that's stillborn babies per 1,000 births. Maternal mortality is the number of maternal deaths or the death of the mother per basically 1 lakh women of that same reproductive age. Then we talk about standardized mortality rate. It is basically a proportional comparison to the number of deaths which is expected if the population is of the standard composition. So the age, gender, etc. is all standard. What would be the rate of mortality? So these are the kinds of mortality we discussed. Here there is important concept that under total crude rate or the crude death rate, we say that the fourth important cause of the crude death rate is the HIV/AIDS. So that's the fourth most common cause. Now, if we know the birth rate, we know the death rate, we can calculate the natural increase as we discussed previously. So we can calculate the natural increase. If we know the natural increase, we can know the life expectancy. What is life expectancy? It's average number of years a newborn is expected to live based at the current mortality. So if I say mortality in India presently is say 65 years, that means a person or a baby born in India is assumed to have an average life expectancy of 65 years. So that is the basic concept of understanding the concept of life expectancy. So we say that life expectancy is highest for Japan, and developed countries it's more. Now we have talked about fertility, mortality, we have talked about all these concepts. But before we do any further understanding of any other models in demography, we must know the factors affecting the birth rate and the death rate. So what are the factors that affect birth rate? So the factors that affect birth rate include age, then you have the gender or the sex, you have the age of marriage, you have the widow remarriage or remarriages cases in case of divorces. So you have remarriage, then you need to take into account the reproductive wastages, then the cases of abortions, infant mortality, then you talk about government policies. So government policies of some countries, if they are strong, the birth rate ought to get controlled. Then we talk about the level of literacy and education. You have the level of urbanization. You must understand the cost of living. Based on the cost of living, if the cost of living is too high, the birth rate automatically decreases. Then if the poverty is more, the birth rate is affected. And finally, you have the conflicts or wars in any area. So these all factors affect the birth rate. It might increase and decrease based on the parameters that we have included. Now, what are the factors affecting death rate? So how can you control death rate? So you have medical factors, you have the standards of living, you have water, hygiene, then you have diseases, crime, war, conflicts. These all again affect the level of death rate in any region. So in this session, as we have seen, we have discussed the basic parameters. We would be talking about other two concepts, that would be the demographic theories and the concepts and the problems of overpopulation in the next session. Hope you enjoyed this session. Stay tuned for the further updates. Have a good day ahead.